I'm your host, Sean McKenzie. Thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data analytics and data engineering. In this episode, we're going to talk about parameterized queries in .NET, although parameterized queries apply to many different environments, but we're going to apply parameterized queries using ADO.NET in the VB.NET environment, and what you see today will be applicable also to C# if you're using C# environment. So why are parameterized queries important? And I think there's many reasons for this. The first one, which is all over, everywhere that everybody talks about, is to prevent SQL injection, which is a way for people to insert bits of code when things like web forms and things are being, retrieving data from a database, and somebody puts a little snippet of SQL in there that sort of terminates the previous, what was put in there, and then runs an SQL statement on a database, which can be very, very dangerous. And so that's the first reason why we want to use parameterized queries, especially when we're building anything to do with user input and things like that. The second reason that we might want to use parameterized queries, which I find in my environments, I think is the second most important, is for performance. And a lot of people don't realize that sometimes it's much better to run your queries on a database server to utilize all of that infrastructure and things like that, so that queries or data manipulations that might take quite a long time if you just suck the data into your ADO.NET data tables and try to do all your manipulation there, it might actually be a lot slower than if you actually just did your queries and all your joins and everything and fired that off to the database server, and it's got all this computing power that's just going to return that much more quickly. So that's my second reason. So without further ado, let's get to our parameterized queries. Okay, so I've created a database here called YouTube stuff in my server, and so I put a table in there that came from the World Bank, and it's all about climate change data, which was an interesting one. And so for our first demonstration here, I'm just going to we're going to query that table just so that we can use some parameters. And just before we go to VB.NET, I'm just going to show you in SSMS here, Management Studio, just show you what the table looks like. So here's the table. It's got a whole bunch of rows in it. And I actually downloaded this for one of my previous videos. We can reuse this table here. So say we wanted to get the top, all the information for a particular country, then we could put in a parameter and say, where country name equals Canada, which is pretty straightforward. And so we'll get all these different measures from the climate change data that have to do with Canada. Or if we wanted to change to a different country, we could do that as well. And like, for example, say we wanted to use this series code here, and we just wanted to get the information about land area below 5 meters, then we could add to our query just like we would, using Management Studio here. We can do our query and get that single row for Canada, and that'll give us the data that we want. And we're going to do the same query in VB.NET. So in your new project area there, you'll see a console app. That's what I'm going to use today. And I'm going to call it the demo parameterized queries, and then we can start our coding. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to use an import statement for system.data. It doesn't look like it is actually needed for this case. However, in some of your projects you may need to use the import statement in order for a bunch of the stuff like IntelliSense and that to work and to make it easier for you. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and I'll put a comment at the top here to demonstrate a parameterized query, and then we can move ahead from there. Now before I do anything, I'm going to pop into my app.config, which is the configuration file that goes with this little exe that we're building here. And I'm going to add one section here to the I'm going to add the connection strings section, and I'll add name is going to be database. We'll call it data server, and then it'll be the connection string, which I'm going to paste in here in a minute, which is a string that connects to my dummy database. And I'll paste that in, and boom, we've got our dummy data and our dummy database there. And with that, we can sort of save that. That's going to help us to do this correctly instead of putting our connection string into our code, which isn't a very good practice. And that'll let us continue on. We're also going to go to our project and add a reference. And we're going to add the system.config configuration, and that's going to allow us to use the configuration manager for ADO.NET. And the configuration manager is going to allow us to look up that connection string in a safe way, and we can use that as following here. We can make a string variable to hold our connection string, which is a nice way of doing it, and we'll use the configuration and then the configuration manager and then our connection strings, which is going to give us the connection string that we want. You can have multiple connection strings in your project if you can have up as many as you want, basically, and that's going to allow us to get that into a string. And that way nobody can sort of see it from the code itself. And then the next thing we're going to do is create a connection object, and then we'll make a data set, and then we'll make a SQL string to go with that. So for the connection, we'll say new sqlclient.sql connection. We'll put our connection string in there, and that's going to allow us to create that object that can be used for our data adapter. The next thing, I'll create a new data set. That's where we're going to plunk our table in there when we do a lookup, and then we can assign a data table to that. So we'll create a new data set, and then I'll type in, I've got the SQL string, and it'll be just as a first lookup, we'll demonstrate how this works with the select distinct country name from our climate change data, and that's going to give us back a list, and we'll rip through that list using a loop just to show that we got it, and that'll kind of give you an idea of how it works getting data using ADO.NET before we jump into using a parameter. And then we'll create our data adapter. Now that we have a connection and a SQL string, a simple SQL string, we'll create our data adapter as new sqlclient.sql data adapter, and then we'll plunk in our SQL string there and the connection object, and that's going to create that new data adapter for us to use. And I'll go back up here as well, and I think I'll open that connection so that we've got a nice connection to use there. And then from there we can sort of move on, and we can say data adapter.fill, and that'll fill our data set, and it'll put a nice a table in there for us from the retrieve from the server, and we'll give it a name called countries within our data set, so that if we wanted, we could have multiple tables inside of our data set. And then we'll make a data table variable, and we'll just say that it's equal to that countries table. And there, right there, we've got a nice data set, data table from our data set, and we can loop through that by saying for each row in the data table, let's output the what we've got in the first field there, which is the only field at this point, country name. So I'll type in that name, field name, which came across into our data set, And then I'll go up. I think I'm going to give some feedback here to the user. So we'll add a console.writeLine, starting, so that we can see that the code has made it that far, and it gives a little bit of feedback. And also we should add a message for just before the retrieving, where we're retrieving the data, and that'll sort of be nice to watch as our console application progresses. And just before I run this, I should go back to my app.config, and I should change the database name because I pasted in that data or connection string, and it's got the wrong database. I have a demonstration database as well. This is from our YouTube stuff database, and we'll use that instead. So I'll save that, and then just before we run this the first time to show how all this works, and so from there I can hit F5, and we'll see if we get any errors when we hit F5. And it looks like it's building, and our parameters video, so I'll drag this over, and it looks like it's starting. And oh, there we go. So yeah, it ripped through all of the country names in that climate change data worksheet, and so our first query is a success without a parameterized query. So now what I can do is I can sort of extend our, I guess I'll do this on a couple lines here. So I'll extend our select query, and we'll put a where clause on it, and we'll say where, country name is equal to, now this is the difference between dynamic SQL and using a parameterized query, because I could type in, say, Canada, which would be sort of hard-coded in there now, or I could create a variable that changes, and I could rerun this query over and over and change it in this SQL itself, but that's not a good practice, and it's subject to SQL injection. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to add a variable in our SQL string, a parameter called @country, and that's going to stay the same every time we run this, and so this won't be, they could type in, some drop database statements or whatever into that variable, and it would just, try to select against those, and it would fail. So in this case, what we can do is I'll go down. I'll add some more feedback, so that it'll actually stop, and a read key so that it'll actually stop when we run this, because this is going to go really fast. And so we've got our @country parameter in there. So the next thing we need to do is we'll use the method 1 of adding a parameter to our query, which is to add a parameter with the value all in one statement. And this is quite useful if you're just doing a one-off. So we could say our data adapter select command dot parameters add with value, and then we'll put in the country and then the value, and that's going to create a parameter on there with the value already on it. And so this is great for one-offs where you're not looping through a whole bunch of, say you've got a stream of data coming in and you need to run this every time. You wouldn't necessarily use this method. You might use method 2. But if you had a one-off, you could do it this way in your data and just say add the parameter with the value, boom, you're done, and then you could go from there. And even better, you could create a find string, str find, and put that in instead, in case you did want to have it change a couple of times. That's another way that you could do it. So now we've got all the pieces that we kind of need in order to move forward. We've sort of got our select distinct string, our SQL string, and then we've got a where clause with a parameter in it, and we've also added that parameter with a value to our data adapter. So we can hit F5 and then I'll grab this and see if we get any errors here. And well, it looks like it did. So it grabbed Canada, and which is what we wanted it to do, just to demonstrate how that works. And we selected Canada where it is equal to Canada, but it did return the right value. So we could also say, you know, select where is equal to Colombia, change the variable, and we could hit F5, and just to make sure that we're getting a return on that. And you can see Colombia was included in the climate change data, and so we can sort of do a couple of tests there. So what if we wanted to add another parameter and get a different selection of data? Well, we could certainly do that by changing our SQL string, and we could add our series variable and series code, which is what we saw in when I showed you in SQL Management Studio. We had the series code as well that we narrowed down to. So what we'll do is we'll change our series, we'll change our select command, and we'll add another parameter, and we'll say where the series is equal to our series. Well, we should add another variable here. We'll add dim series as str series as string, and we'll say that that's equal to our value that we had in the SQL Server Management Studio when we did our first query, which is this sort of delimited period delimited string here. And so we'll grab that and we'll put our str series in, and we'll grab it for, so I'll just jump up here and we'll get rid of our distinct keyword for this one, and we'll add some different value or different fields to our list. So I'll have to grab some fields from here. So I'll add the series name, and I'll add two fields. Let's see which ones have value from our list that we had there. So 1990 looks like it had value, and then if we scroll over some more, looks like 2000 had a value. So we'll grab those two just for fun. So we'll grab the field called 1990, and then we'll grab the field called 2000, and which were 2 years that there were measures for that particular series. And so now we've got country name, series name, 1990, 2000, where the country name is the country and the series name is the series, using two parameters. And we've got Canada in there, and the I believe it's the land area under 5 meters. And so just to show that we got that data, when we go through our loop here through the rows, we'll add the field data for those additional fields as we go here. So I'll just put a comma in and add the series name, and then I'll go down a level. I think here this is kind of cramped, but then we'll add the series name, then we'll add the 1990 row or column from the row, and then we'll add the 2000. We'll put a comma in there too, and then we'll add the 2000 to it as well. We'll put a comma there, and then that will give us sort of an output for exactly what we're looking for according to, using a parameterized query. Then once I've got that last row in there, I can have a look over and save it, and then I'll hit F5 and just sort of see what we get for an output, see if we get any errors in here, and there we go. So Canada, land area below 5 meters, and then it has the two measures which we asked for from the data. So there you can see that's the first sort of really nice method of adding parameterized or parameters to your query, so that it makes it safe from SQL injection, and also for very big queries it can be quite a lot faster to search using the database engine as opposed to searching it locally. And there we go. So for our next method, I guess I'll call it method 2, which is a little bit different from the way we just did it. In method 2, we're going to add a couple of parameters with types instead of just adding it with a value. And so we're going to use our car sales table from the same database, which just is a simple table that I plunked a bunch of numbers and stuff into. So we're going to add and remove and update some rows from here from a fictional car sales place. And so if I wanted to insert some data into the car sales table, I would need to make an insert string for that as well. And I might say insert into car sales, and we'll put our car maker, car model, the price and the color, and then we might we'll extend that onto the next onto the next row here, so we can continue typing, and then we'll say values, and then we can, in a traditional way, we would just put the values in single quotes, but as we're doing our parameters today, we're gonna create parameters for each of those, and we're going to say maker, model, price, and color. And that's going to give us our SQL string that'll allow us to do an insert into the database. So in order to do this kind of operation, we're going to use an sqlclient.sql command, and we can use our SQL string and our open connection object as well, just like we did for the previous operation. And this will allow us to create a new command, and then on that command we'll add some parameters. We should add a close at the bottom there. I added a close, just realized I never closed it on our previous way through, and it's always good to close your connections when you're done. So we'll say with the command object, we're going to add we'll add a parameter, and we're going to give it the same names as in our string up above, and but this time we're going to add the types. This helps to be a little more specific when we're using parameters, and so we're going to say the maker is an nvarchar and the model is an nvarchar as well, using the SQL db type.nvarchar. And the price, I think we'll use a decimal for our price, and so we'll say the at price is equal to SQL db type, and we'll say decimal for the data type, and then we'll do an add for the color, which is also, in this case, happens to be an nvarchar. So we'll say color SQL db type dot nvarchar, and that's going to add 4 parameters to our command object, which is what we want to see. And this is very useful if you have a big loop and you've got stream data that's coming in and you need to reuse the parameters over and over again. It's not sort of one-off, so you would create parameters this way, and this would really help you to handle a lot of parameter data, or a lot of data coming in, and you could reuse the parameters over and over. And as you can see here, I'm creating some variables just to hold our data. So we can say that the maker is equal to Honda, the model is equal to Ridgeline, say, price is equal to a decimal, and it's it's a decimal, and the color is going to be it'll be red, say. And so we'll make variables for each of those. And so if you did have a big loop or a big procedure that you were populating these variables, and that makes it very easy when you need to come back to execute your your insert statements, you can use your variables to populate the parameters that you created before. So I'll just add a note in here just for that. So you could use this in a loop from another source, and then you could populate your variables. We're only doing it one time, just with some static variables, but you can sort of see how this might be used. And then we'll go ahead and populate our parameters so that we can populate all 4 of those parameters, and then can sort of run our command or execute our command and see what we get afterward. So we'll say with our command, we'll say first parameter, which is 0 in the 0-based numbering. We'll do the first one is equal to the maker. The second one is equal to the model string. The third one's equal to the price, and the fourth one is equal to the color. And so those will get populated as we go here, and that sort of gives you an idea of loading the values into the parameters before we execute against the database. And it's a nice way of doing it, especially if you've got a big procedure doing a lot of data. You can certainly do it this way. And I'll have a quick look over everything here, and then the next thing that we'll do is we'll just say our command execute non-query, and that is going to execute our query for us. And then we'll mark our next section there as cleanup, just so that we've got all the sections together. And it looks like I need to change my my integers there to go 0, 1, 2, 3 instead of 0, 1, 3, 4. And I'll have a quick look here, and it looks like oh yeah, I got to add my brackets on my fields here. So insert into car sales, and there's our car maker, car model, car price, car color. And then I can hit F5 on that and see what we get. So there it goes, it's starting, retrieve data, and Canada, it got the data from Canada, and then it said it's done. So we can press any key to continue there, and let's see what we got as a result. And if I go back to SQL Server Management Studio and hit refresh, you'll see that the Honda Ridgeline data is there. That's the one that we just added using our parameter query. And I'll press any key here and we'll get out of that one. That'll stop it from executing. Okay, and our next example will be for a delete, and we'll use a parameter in there as well. So you can use these other commands, delete and update, and sometimes you can reuse your command objects, and that can also be very handy for keeping your code sort of minimal. So what we'll do here is we're going to say delete from car sales where sale ID is equal to @ID, which is our parameter, just like we did in our previous examples. And then we can go ahead and we'll create a command object. We'll call it cmd delete as new SQL client and SQL command, and that's gonna help us to create one. And we can use our SQL string just like we did in the other example, plus the connection object, which is already open. And then from there we can go ahead and add our parameter to our command object. So we'll say command delete .parameters.add with value, and we'll add the name of it, which is @ID, and then the value, which we're going to just plug an integer this time around. So we'll say delete the first row. So delete row number 1, and let's see what happens when we run that one against our database. So we can save, and we can add execute non-query, just like we did on the previous way around. We'll use the execute non-query method, and then we'll set the parameter 0 dot value equal to 16, and we'll execute it again, just to show how you can reuse it all in one shot. So we've got two deletes using the same delete statement, just changing the parameter on each one, and I'll hit save on that. And I'll add a little bit of feedback for the users here. I'll just do a console.writeLine saying that we're going to delete, and then we'll go back up here, and I'll add a bit more feedback here too, I think. And I'll just say console.writeLine, and we're going to do an insert. So we've got an insert, we've got a delete, and our next example will be an update. So there we go, we've got our delete in there, and we can hit F5 and see what we get. So we've got a little more feedback this time. So we retrieved our data, we inserted our data, we deleted, all using parameters, and then that one finished up nicely. And if we go take a look at our database here, we'll pull up SQL Server Management Studio, and I've got my car sales query going again, and you can see that the record number 1 is missing, as well as record number 16, which were the two delete statements that we put in there, and that sort of completes the delete example. And from there we can go ahead and start our next example, which is the update statement using parameters, creating a parameterized query for an update statement. And for this one, we'll update the car sales table, and we'll set the model equal to a model parameter, so we'll put @model in there. And then we'll also need a parameter for the where, so that we don't update the whole table, we just update where the ID is equal to a certain number. So we've got update car sales, set car model equal to @model, where ID is equal to or sale ID is equal to @ID, and that's going to give us a nice little parameterized query. So we'll do the same as we did for delete. We'll say update command update as new SQL client SQL command, and we'll use the SQL string and the connection again, just as we did for the delete. And then from there we could use a with statement. We don't really need to here, but say you had 10 variables, then this would cut down the amount of code that you'd have to write. So we'll say with object command update dot parameters, we'll say add, and we'll say @model, and then we'll add a type to that. We'll say SQL DB type dot envarchar for the model. So that's going to create a nice parameter for us that we can put a value in later. And for the next one, we can say .add @ID, and then we'll say SQL DB type .integer, and so that's going to be nice and precise for that case. And then just like we did in the previous examples, we'll do the same thing. We'll load our integer or our envarchar and integer parameters with some values. So we'll say command parameters 0 dot value is equal to this time we'll just plug it. We'll say CRV, and we'll say parameters 1 dot value is equal to say 17. So we'll update row 17 with CRV, and then we'll say command update dot execute, and oh, we've got the wrong parameters here. So it's command update and command update. So we'll update those as well before we say go here, and then we'll save that, and we can add some feedback to this one as well. We can say console.writeLine updating, and that will sort of give a little feedback just to show that this section of the code is running, and then we can save, and then I think we're ready to go here. We got our execute non-query, and we can see what we get when we run that one. So hit F5, and now we've got a bunch of statements running, and I'm hoping they don't conflict with each other. There we go. We've got inserting, deleting, updating, and so we did an update on row 17. Let's see what we get in the database. So I'll just grab our thing here and hit refresh on that, and then 17 is CRV, and that's actually exactly what we wanted to see. So the new rows after 15 were all ridgelines, and so we updated row 17 from ridgeline to CRV, and that's the update statement working with a parameterized query. And that sort of completes our overview of the create, read, update, and delete functions that we can do using parameterized queries. I would encourage you to make sure that you do dispose of your objects when you're done. Whether you do that explicitly as I'm doing here, or if you use the using structure for your coding, which is also a nice way of doing it. And that is how you do parameterized queries in .NET. I hope you enjoyed our discussion today about parameterized queries and the importance of preventing SQL injection and getting some performance on your queries against a database instead of doing manipulations in memory in your C# or in your VB.NET code. If you like what you saw today, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet, and make sure to click the bell when you see the bell so that you'll be notified of any new material that I put up on the channel. Have a great day, have a safe day, and I'll catch you next time.